Ready for a deep dive? Today we're jumping into multimodal translation in music with this master's thesis, multimodal translation in music. Sounds pretty intense, right? But trust me, it's fascinating stuff.
Yeah, it really gets you thinking about how we experience everything, not just language.
And we've got examples from Hitchcock, too. Get this, a composer who turned the New York City skyline into music.
Yeah, Hyder Villa-Lobos. I mean, talk about translating visuals into sound.
It really makes you wonder, is music really a universal language, like people say?
Right. Can a melody alone really convey the same thing to everyone, everywhere?
So before we get ahead of ourselves, let's break it down. What exactly is multimodal translation? It's got to be more than just, words in different languages.
Exactly. Think of it like a stop sign. You don't need a translation to know that bright red octagon means stop.
Because the color, the shape, it all means something.
Exactly. Multimodal translation recognizes that colors, shapes, sounds, they all carry meaning, sometimes even more powerfully than words alone.
It's like how a composer uses instruments, the tempo, all of that, to make you feel a certain way. They're translating a feeling into sound.
Precisely. And Vilela, the author here, he really digs into whether music is a universal language.
I always thought that was a bit simplistic. Like, sure, a powerful song can give you goosebumps, but does it hit everyone the same way no matter their background?
That's the debate. Some researchers say it's biology, that we're hardwired to react to certain sounds. Others say it's all about the cultural context. Like, we learn to associate a driving drum beat with excitement.
So is it nature or nurture when it comes to music? This is making me rethink all those times I totally misjudged someone's reaction to a song. What's the big deal if music does have inherent meaning? What changes?
Well, it could change how we teach music, maybe even use it to better understand different cultures. Valela's work opens up so many possibilities.
This is already changing how I think about music. Now tell me more about this composer who turned the NYC skyline into music. That sounds like multimodal translation in action.
Oh, absolutely. This is Hyder Villa-Lobos, and his New York Skyline melody is a perfect example. He used a technique he called the melody of the mountains. He basically translated the shape of the city into music.
Wait, so he looked at like a picture of the city and just heard music. How is that even possible?
He used the shapes of the buildings, the flow of the streets to create the melody. Like tall skyscrapers would be high notes, busy streets would be fast rhythms. It's all in the thesis, even has diagrams and everything.
Wow, so he really painted a picture of the city just using sound. It makes you wonder how much we're constantly translating without even realizing it, like just experiencing the world.
Exactly. We're always taking in sensory information and making sense of it.
And this idea of artistic recreation, like taking one art form and making it into another, that just gets even more interesting when you think about it as multimodal translation. It's like every art form has its own language.
Absolutely. Each one a different way of understanding the world around us.
So we're seeing how meaning can go beyond words, even beyond images. But what about those times when music seems to tap into something deeper, something words just can't express?
Ah, the ineffable.
Exactly. That feeling you get from a certain song, it's hard to explain.
And yet it's still communicating something, isn't it? Even if there are no words for it. Vilela would say this is one of the most powerful things about music. Like, music can make you feel something so specific, but try putting it into words, it just doesn't quite capture it.
Totally. Like, how do you explain the feeling of nostalgia a certain song gives you? You just end up saying, that feeling, which helps no one.
Exactly. But something's definitely being communicated, even without a direct translation.
Right. It's like you get it or you don't. Which, speaking of getting it, how does this all connect back to like how we communicate now with all the emojis and memes and stuff?
Oh, that's a great point. I mean, think about it. We use emojis all the time to express feelings that words just don't quite convey.
Right. A picture's worth 1,000 words. A heart emoji is worth like a whole love letter these days.
And memes, too. They take a shared cultural experience, often something visual, and turn it into like this whole commentary on something else.
And sometimes you see a meme in another language, but you just get it because the image, the idea, it transcends the language barrier.
Exactly. It's like we're already living in a multimodal world, even if we don't always realize it. And this is where Vilela's work is so relevant, because he's pushing us to think beyond just words on a page.
It's like if we accept that meaning isn't just in the words themselves, but in all these other things too, how do we even translate a text anymore?
Right. It becomes about more than finding the equivalent words in another language. You have to capture the tone, the imagery, the whole cultural context.
It's like when a movie gets dubbed, and sometimes it's just awful because they just translated the words without like getting the feeling, the humor, all of that.
Exactly. A good dub, it's like a whole other layer of translation happening.
So basically, translation is way more complex than we often think it is. Speaking of which, I remember Vilela also talks about composers who actually set out to translate visual art into music.
Yeah. He talks about composers like Honegger, for example. He has this piece called Pacific 231 that's supposed to evoke the feeling of a speeding train.
Wow, just using music. So like the tempo is the speed of the train, the dynamics are its size, that kind of thing.
Exactly. It's like finding the sonic equivalents for visual elements, and it shows how translation can happen even between art forms that seem totally different.
So instead of a painting of a train, we get a symphony of a train. That's wild.
Right. It's about capturing the essence of something, even if it's not a literal translation. And this kind of thing, it's not just happening between music and painting, you know? Think about books being made into movies or plays.
It's like each art form is just a different way of looking at the same experience, trying to make sense of it in its own way. Which actually makes me think about this idea of subjective experience. Like we've been talking about how our backgrounds and experiences shape how we understand things. So is it even possible to perfectly translate an experience from one person to another?
That's a great question. And it kind of gets to the heart of what Malala is arguing, which is that translation in any form always involves interpretation. And interpretation means that something is always going to be lost or changed in the process.
Well, it's like that game we played as kids, Telephone, where you whisper something around a circle and it always ends up completely different.
Exactly. Except in this case, it's not just the words that are changing, it's the entire context, the individual experiences that each person brings to the table.
Which I guess brings us right back to music and the ineffable. Because if you can't fully explain an experience in words, how do you even begin to translate it?
It's like you can describe the notes, the instruments, the tempo, all the technical aspects of a piece of music, but that doesn't tell you how it's going to make you feel.
It's like trying to explain a joke. Sometimes the explanation just ruins it. You just have to be there to get it.
Exactly. And that's what makes music so powerful. It can tap into those shared human experiences, those things that words just can't quite grasp.
It's like music lets us speak this whole other language, the language of emotions, even when we don't have the right words. It's pretty amazing when you think about it.
It really is. And it makes you realize translation is so much more than just words. It's about capturing those ineffable qualities, the emotions, the experiences that go beyond language.
Which brings us back to Valela's main point, right? That translation is inherently multimodal. It's not just about swapping words, it's about capturing the whole essence of something and recreating it in a new form.
Exactly. And that means we need to rethink how we even define translation and meaning in the first place. We can't just focus on the words themselves. We need to consider the cultural context, the metaphors, even individual perspectives.
It's like those optical illusions where you can see like two different things in the same image.
Yeah.
It all depends on how you look at it.
Exactly. What we see, what we understand, it's not just about the thing itself. It's about us, the viewer, the listener, the reader, bringing our own experiences to it.
So you're saying that multimodal translation isn't just about understanding different languages, it's about understanding different ways of seeing the world.
Absolutely. And that's more important than ever, you know. Think about how much we communicate through images and sounds now with emojis, memes, videos. It's like a whole other language we're all learning to speak.
It's true. You can send someone a meme, and even if they don't speak the same language, they just get it.
Right. And that's going to change how we think about translation going forward. It's not just about bridging languages, it's about bridging different ways of experiencing the world.
So are you saying that we're all becoming multimodal translators, whether we realize it or not?
Think about it. Every day we're bombarded with information, images, sounds from all over the place, and we're constantly having to interpret it, make sense of it. That's translation in action.
Wow, this deep dive has really changed how I think about, well, everything. We've gone from Hitchcock to Heider Villa-Lobos to memes. It's been quite a journey.
It really has. Valela's work really makes you think about the power of art, the limits of language, and how we create meaning in a world that's constantly evolving.
Absolutely. If you're listening and this has sparked your curiosity, definitely check out Valela's thesis. It's a fascinating read. And as we wrap things up, here's something to think about. If, like Villela argues, all communication is a kind of translation, then what does that really mean for how we understand each other and the world around us? It's a question worth pondering and something we'll keep exploring in our future deep dives. See you next time.